All right, well, I know it's football season now. We're underway. It's a good, always a good weekend in Alabama life. But I want to talk to you about baseball for just a second. Something really cool happened on Monday. Some of you saw this in the news. Some of you might have even watched this. But there was an afternoon game on Monday between the Toronto Blue Jays and the Boston Red Sox. They were playing in Boston on Tuesday afternoon. And this was the first time in Major League history that a person played for both teams on the same game. When I heard that, I thought, cool, I need to hear how this happened. So what was happening is back in late June, Boston and Toronto were playing, and there's a guy named Danny Jansen, and he was batting seventh, and he was up to bat. And I think he hit a foul ball for his first swing, and it was a strike, obviously. And then the rain started to come, and it was a rain delay, and it was so bad, it was a washout. They said, we have to reschedule this game for later in August. And so they rescheduled the game for this week on Monday. The thing that happened in the meantime was Danny Jansen was traded from the Blue Jays to the Boston Red Sox, and when the game resumed, Danny Jansen, or the pinch hitter for Danny Jansen, had to fill in for Danny Jansen's batting, that he was supposed to finish that batting sequence. And interestingly enough, the catcher was Danny Jansen then for the Red Sox. And so Danny Jansen caught the at-bat for Danny Jansen, if that makes sense, which it does, but it doesn't, but it does, right? And it's a both-and thing. I hope that you win some trivia someday because you heard it in a sermon. But that is a weird little tidbit that happened, and I thought, that's kind of cool. And then I thought, hey, you know what? We've got all kinds of things like that in Christianity. Things that are like this and like that, and they're together, but they're not the same, but they are, but they're not, but they are. Let me tell you what I mean. How about when in United Methodism we talk about grace and responsibility? Grace freely given to you, and yet responsibility that follows from being a recipient of that grace. How about one God, three persons? Both and kind of the same, kind of different. What about Jesus? Fully human, fully divine. Both together at the same time. How could you have a Red Sox and a Blue Jay? It can be done, folks. How can you have these things in the Christian tradition? It can be done, folks. How can you have a national holiday that celebrates work and labor as a day off? But we can do it. We can do it tomorrow, together, you and me. So, we've got all of these things, and today we have one that James introduces to us again. James, in the New Testament, a very short letter, just a couple of chapters long. James, historically believed to be James, the brother of Jesus. And in this short letter, we find in the verses that I just read to you about faith and works. Not one or the other, but both. Two sides of the same coin. Both important. Both challenging, and yet both imperative as part of our Christian faith. So, one of the things that we get into a sticky part with is that there are other parts of Scripture that say faith alone. Or, as a big part of the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther championed this idea, sola fide, faith alone. That's all it takes. Faith is what saves us, our beliefs, our faith, our spirituality, these things, believing in the death and the resurrection and the love and the grace and the redemption of Jesus Christ for our lives, that is all it takes. Because if it becomes about works, then we get into that works righteousness stuff. Or can I do more things to earn points with God, to earn greater favor, and it will reflect better on me, and maybe I can save myself if I do enough good works. And we've all had enough theological education to understand that that's problematic, right? that seems to go against what is taught historically in Christianity, that the idea that you can earn your salvation by doing enough good things, by doing enough good works. That doesn't sit well with any of us. And so it must be about faith. But James isn't saying something contradictory to the rest of the scriptures that would suggest that it's all about faith. He is simply saying, and again, I think that we understand this, conceptually we get the idea, that if you are a person of faith, and that if your faith has transformed you and has shaped you and helps you to be the person that you are and to believe what you believe and act how you do and speak how you speak, then certainly there should be some good works that follow from that life. Put another way, the fruit that our faith bears are the ways that we perform or practice good works. I think we get that. And this is just one of those many concepts within Christianity that, okay, I get it, I understand it, I believe it, and yet the doing it part is the hard part. All of us can think of people, and ourselves at times, who are guilty of believing the right things, but behaving the wrong way. And that is called hypocrisy. Interestingly, when Jesus gets really worked up in the Bible, whenever Jesus gets most upset with somebody, 9 times out of 10, it may even be 10 times out of 10, it's with religious people who sort of peacock around, puffing out their chest, pointing out the shortcomings of others, and behave in a way that is contrary to what they claim to believe. Jesus doesn't get most upset with people who are confused or non-believers or people who make mistakes. He gets upset with the people who are super confident in their own ability to believe the right things, but when they behave in such a way, it contradicts what they claim to believe. His favorite example of this seems to be the Pharisees. This sect within Judaism that is made up of well-to-do people, politically connected people, the movers and the shakers, the people who all of the lower-class people seem to look up to, and they are the ones who walk around and strut around, and Jesus points out them and says, look at them praying in a public space to try to get attention. And look at them looking on others who are less fortunate, who are suffering, who are struggling, the poor, and saying, see that? They must have done something wrong. Their sins are so great that they are reaping the consequences of that. And this infuriates Jesus. And he calls it out over and over again. There's also a story even before Jesus' ministry where John the Baptist is down by the water's edge in the Jordan River, and he is baptizing people. And the Pharisees, probably dressed like this in my head, and they come down to the water's edge, and they're walking down there. And remember what John says to them? You brood of vipers, who warned you about the wrath to come? And Jesus is peeved in this moment. Well, actually, John is in that moment. But Jesus would have been too, because he understands that this is exactly the problem. And it's not just about being dishonest and having not enough integrity to practice what you preach. But the thing that Jesus, I know, would struggle with too, is that he says, don't you see what this is doing to others who might otherwise be influenced by you? Don't you see how people are making assumptions about what it means to be a godly and holy person? When they see you behaving the way that you are, it dilutes your message. It takes away, it strips the power of what you are trying to say and communicate and teach. So really what James is getting around to saying in this text, as I think is obvious at this point, is he is just saying, look, if you claim to have faith, but there is nothing in your life to suggest that you are a person of faith, then what you are claiming is a false faith. It's artificial. It's dead. And that just makes sense. So how do we live that two sides of the same coin? How do we have faith and works? Not because we earn our salvation through the works, but because the works are a necessary byproduct of a changed life in faith. They are the fruit that is born of a faith-filled life. Now, John Wesley, I think, helps us with this because he talks about two different types of works. He talks about works of piety and works of mercy. Works of piety are those things like we spent a lot of time talking about back in Lent last spring when we did that Soul Feast book together. Those are things like worship, prayer, fasting, communion, Bible study. Those are those things that you do oftentimes by yourself, or they are things that help you become closer and tighter knit with God. Those things that feel transcendent when we practice them in a powerful way. And then the works of mercy are the ways that we serve our neighbors. Feeding, clothing, sheltering, justice. Those are the kinds of things that John Wesley is talking about when he divides the works of piety and the works of mercy into two different categories. And so here is my advice. If we're looking for a roadmap for how to have the kinds of works that I think James is talking about in this letter, looking at those kinds of practices that Wesley names is a great place to start. But here's the other thing that I want to mention, because we're deep thinking, we're honest, we talk about the stuff that really matters, and what I want to point out is at some times in our lives, we still want to believe the right things, but it's hard for us. Those moments of difficult questions, those moments of doubt, sometimes cynicism that creeps in, sometimes when we feel like, yes, I would call myself a Christian, but I don't feel as connected to God as I would like to feel or as I felt in the past. And my advice to you would be to double down on those works of piety and mercy. Continue to practice the works, because in doing those things, we often find that they stoke the flames of faith as well. Whenever I feel that distance from God, maybe it's been a rough couple of days, maybe it's been a rough week or a rough season, and I don't feel that closeness to God that I have felt in the past, the way that I go back in and try to work on that is by immersing myself in Scripture, setting aside more important and scheduled time for prayer, making sure that I don't miss worship, taking communion out of every available opportunity. Those kinds of things matter. Many of you know who have regularly practiced serving your neighbors by providing meals or working on housing or all of those things that we talked about, have found that when you serve your neighbor, it helps you feel closer to God. You can't help but do that. And so sometimes the other side of the coin isn't about earning your salvation through the works, but being reminded that through some of those works, that those are ways that we reinvigorate our spiritual growth as well. It's a both and. It's a Blue Jay and a Red Sox. It's a Labor Day, that's a day off. It's faith and it's works. It's not a contradiction, it's just two sides of the same coin. And when James says this, he reminds us of an important lesson. That to be people of faith, the vibrant kind of faith that we all desire to have and hold on to, there will be from that faith evidence, fruits, blessings that flow forth. As we witnessed this morning, we got to be a part of Maddie's baptism. And I asked you 3 questions as a congregation about your role and your commitment, not only recommitting yourself to Christ as baptized followers, but also what you are going to do for this child and her family. How are you going to continue to share this message with her? How are you going to serve this family? How are your works of mercy and piety going to be extended to them? We think of things like offering to help out with children's ministry. We think of things like teaching a class or being a part of a Bible study, but it's also praying for that child and her family. It's also being reminded of our interconnectedness. These are part of the ways that the works of the church remind us of our connection to one another and our deep commitment to all of the children and all of the individuals in this group, because we collectively are a church family together. So as we prepare now to come to the table, to do one of the things that Wesley said is one of the works of piety, we come to receive this gift, more than just a piece of bread dipped into the cup, but a reminder of the powerful and the deep connection that we have to Christ, his transforming work in our lives, and how we together will change the world because of that. Will you pray with me?